Thank you so much for being with us today. Today's discussion is going to be on the United Nations peace-building role, organized by the Center for Conflict Resolution. This public dialogue on the United Nations peace-building role in the Horn of Africa. Exactly what is peace-building? How does it really intersect the continuum from conflict to peace? Where does it really start? How long does it last? So how does one really tackle the various imperatives that are built into this concept of peace building in situations that can be at times so different and so trying? And I think that we are blessed this afternoon in having two extremely seasoned and widely respected practitioners, academics, and just very splendid hands that have been at the service of the international community to address this question.
What is the stand of the United Nations political office for Somalia, which is UNPOS, towards the creation of the newly announced formation of Jubaland State?
I was wondering if you could identify, given that you're hoping that the current process isn't going to be the 17th to fail, what it was about the 16th that made it so different, the several elements which you feel stand out from your efforts compared to those that went before.
My question is, what is the role of the United Nations in the Ugarte region of Ethiopia, where there is a high level of human rights abuse, rape, killing, and torture?
The issues, the 5 issues, incentives to move or change the situation on Sudan have been on the table for quite some time. The key issue I would think as a comment to you would be that the key countries that are leading those incentives, particularly the US, has lost the trust and the faith of the Khartoum government, and that potentially newer actors are needed to help bring life back to those issues. And those new partners have tended to, or a number of people have cited those new partners as China and the Gulf states, Qatar in particularly. What is your own perception as to whether a change in the nature and dynamics of the international actors will lead to transformation in Sudan? And do you actually think bringing true meaning to these 5 incentives will change the nature of the political dynamics in Khartoum, or do you think that we're just playing for more time? Do you really think there will be a change in the hardline position in Khartoum?
Professor Abdel-Jabbar.
Thank you. My name is Hamid Abdel-Jabbar, and my question to Professor and Ambassador Gambari. Mr. Gambari, don't you think that Bashir, in fact, sacrificed the south of Sudan in order to be lifted from the sanctions imposed on Sudan? And Bashir was pressured to accept that agreement in order to implement those 3 conditions. Was that necessary to sacrifice South Sudan? In fact, European African Union, or Organization of African Unity, agreed that the borders of the African states should remain the way they are, because if we're going to open the door for separation, there will be another probably 50 more states in Africa. Thank you.
We'll come back to a second round. Let's allow Ambassador Mahiga to respond.
Thank you for the welcome. What is the position of UNPOS, or the United Nations Political Office, on Jubaland? Now, many of you may not know what is Jubaland. Jubaland is one of the regions in southern Somalia. But this has a lower Juba and the middle Juba. In lower Juba is where Kismayo is, which was really the strongest hold of the Al-Shabaab, which has been taken over by the AMISOM led by the Kenyans. In these areas, it is important to establish new administrations, whether it is in the Jubas or in Gedo, or in Bay and Bakol, or in Hiran, that is in the south and central. Now, he's asking me about Jubaland initiative. There are two schools of thought on how to stabilize these areas. One is that you begin from the bottom up. The Shabab has left, whether in Kismayo or in the other parts. In fact, Lower Juba has 5 districts. Shabab is still in 1 district, which is mainly rural district. Now, to establish local administration as part of stabilization, what do you do? There are 2 schools of thought. One was that you establish a regional administration, then you go down to create other administration at the district and the community level. In fact, efforts were already beginning 18 months ago. And they were not only for Lower Juba, it was for Middle Juba and Gedo, both of which are at the border with Kenya.
And we know that the conflict in Darfur, as in Sudan, has huge regional dimension. You have Ethiopia, you have Eritrea, you have Chad, you have Central African Republic, you have Egypt, you have Libya. So the more of the regional actors that are engaged in the peace process in Darfur, I think the better for the prospect of peace. Second question, about incentive old and new to Khartoum, and whether or not we need new actors to give these incentives. Well, frankly, Comfort, I just want, for the sake of peace between these 2 new countries, that pledges made to the government are honored. If you make a pledge and one side is keeping to its bargain, then really you are obliged to also keep your own. Not only for your own credibility on this issue, but how about something else you might need from Khartoum in the future, and they say, well, how can we trust these people who made a pledge and they did not honor, and we honored our part? And I think that even if you have new actors or new people like Qatar, League of Arab States, Turkey could play a role, but I don't think it's a substitute for the need for a change in the dynamics of relations between the government of Sudan and the Western countries. At least for the sake of peace, because you would need the North, whether Bashir is in power or not, to make CPA fully implemented. As I mentioned to you, there are many unresolved issues that were supposed to have been resolved before the referendum, but because the West, I suspect, are far more interested in independence, peaceful, prosperous nations rather than to become failed states. Even if in the interest of your favored country, it's better to be engaged rather than not. Third question, was it necessary to sacrifice South Sudan by the government of Sudan, Republic of Sudan, in exchange for lifting of sanctions? And bear in mind the OU position, you are right, which was at the Cairo summit in 1964, that African boundaries, ridiculous as they may be, separating countries that or people that probably should be united and uniting those that probably should be separated, it's better to keep them and work within them, because to do otherwise will just cause more problems and headache. I accept that. And it has been, what we've seen in South Darfur or Eritrea, Ethiopia, are exceptions that prove the rule. Almost every country in Africa has their own potential South Sudan. That is why when South Sudan became independent, I said, what the cause for celebration? It was a necessity because it was provided for by agreement. CPA said a referendum. The referendum came and went, and 98%, almost reminiscent of the, you remember those elections in Eastern Europe under communism? 98.9%. But it's because there was also a 5-year period where efforts were supposed to be made to make unity attractive. Well, those efforts came a little too little and too late. So they exercised the right of self-determination and voted for separation, and there it is. But I don't think it's a cause to celebrate. It's a necessity to be endured. However, I will say that the task now is for, now that independence is there, it's not a solution to every problem the South has discovered. It's important to work with the North and the international community to help them and the African Union to ultimately make those borders, the division, irrelevant. Because there are a lot of commonalities between the Republic of South Sudan and Sudan. For example, why did they choose the name South Sudan? They could have chosen another name, but they said they are South Sudan. So that's the challenge that is facing them. You are right, my dear brother, to say that Garang was not in favor of separation is true. In fact, he wanted the democratic transformation of Sudan for all. That was the ideal, but he died. And his successors had a much more limited vision of the transformation of South Sudan. The challenge is enormous. Silva Kiir is committed to making the separation work. Pagan Amom is committed. We have to wish them well for the sake even of the North, because as I say, you don't want a failed state next to the Republic of Sudan.
Thank you.
My question is there any role in which the United Nations can play in solving the 4.5 division of the Somali parliament, in which the Somali Bantus known as Jarerwene was mainly discriminated in the division of this parliament? Thank you.
Given the tentative success of UNAMID so far, do you think there's scope for other hybrid UN operations, both in Africa and in other regions? And would you say that the involvement by regional bodies such as the AU has perhaps helped counter what the learned chair referred to earlier as the UN's Christmas tree of objectives that doesn't necessarily always apply to non-Western peace-building situations?
You know, Somalia has clans. In Africa, we talk about ethnic groups. You know, some people call them tribes, but I think they are ethnic groups, aren't they? But in Somalia, the paradox, they speak one language, they have one religion, they have one culture. But it is the longest running conflict in sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Partly it's because of the deep and divisive nature of the clan, which was of course overplayed and entrenched by the Siad Barre regime. The clan phenomena is much more divisive if played on it than the ethnic phenomena. By the age of 9, a Somali child can trace his clan 1,000 years. They memorize and they know at the age of 9. They go back 1,000 years.
The Center for Conflict Resolution really appreciates your feedback. And please join me in a warm round of applause for our two panelists. And thank you so much for coming.
Refreshments.